A busy night in the NHL, the Carolina Hurricanes and Washington Capitals putting their best Monday Night Raw episode together, the Toronto Maple Leafs and Florida Panthers in a game that may have decided the Atlantic Division, and the Chicago Blackhawks in the midst of a very difficult season, all on today's edition of Locked On NHL.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. I am Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers, coming up on a year of hosting Locked On Oilers in about a week now. That's my co-host and my good friend Hunter Hodies, the co-host of Locked On Penguins. And we want to thank everyone that's making Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's show, jam-packed slate. Busy night in the league. That Carolina-Washington game was bananas, and that's where we're going to start today's show. No, that was not a legal move, but there's a lot to talk about as far as Department of Player Safety and all that good stuff. And the game itself, we'll pivot to the Leafs and the Florida Panthers, where the Leafs clinched a playoff spot and very well might have given themselves enough breathing room to pull away in the Atlantic Division from Tampa Bay and Florida. And we'll tie a bow on today's show talking about the Blackhawks' loss to the Avalanche. So, Hunter, my friend, lost in all of this chaos. You have Riley Leonard's NHL debut the other night. You have Ovechkin breathing down Wayne Gretzky's neck. As my one friend likes to say, we're releasing termites in your walls, Wayne Gretzky, we're so in your walls. That was a chaotic game, 3-0 early, and that's generally where we see these games get out of hand, is if a team gets out to a big lead, someone feels obligated to do something stupid to try and shift up the energy, and that's exactly what happened.
100%. And these two teams have not liked each other, Nick, for about, the last 5 to 6 years now?
They had that first round series a couple years ago, and since then, it's always been a little tense.
It feels like, honestly, since 2019, it feels like these two teams have really started to not like each other. And it felt like at first it was a big brother, little brother thing, but I think it's transformed into something more now with, it's more of a regional rivalry. And these two teams, especially these two fan bases, do not like each other. I tweeted this last night, and yes, people, I'm recording from my hotel room in the Dominican Republic. There are no days off here, even though I'm on vacation for this week. But I tweeted this last night. A second round series between these two teams would feed families. Legitimately. These two teams hate each other. These two fan bases, I think, would nuke each other before that series even started. And that atmosphere in Raleigh last night was sensational. It was a lot of fun to watch. You can tell, I think, during the late stages of that third period, I think the Hurricanes were kind of sending a message, Nick, saying, like, we don't fear you guys. Like, we can play with you guys, and we're ready to take this into the playoffs if we get to that point. Because it looks like right now the Capitals, they're going to play that second wildcard team, Nick, and I think it's more than likely we are going to get Devils versus the Hurricanes in the first round. I would take the Hurricanes to win that series if I had to pick one right now, especially with no Jack Hughes, and Hamilton continues to be hurt. And I know the Hurricanes have had their troubles in the playoffs, but still I would take Carolina to win that series. But my overall point is that was a message-sending game by the Hurricanes, telling the Capitals, we know how good you guys are, but we're not afraid of you, and we will play with you in the playoffs if you want to make games like this. Now, the Jalen Chatfield play, I got to say, Nick, I'm surprised there was no discipline for this. But then I also remembered that George Peros runs the NHL Department of Player Safety, and he loves that stuff. So as much as I want to crucify them, and I easily could, like, I get it because Peros, he doesn't care. Like, that's the thing. If the Department of Player Safety was serious, they would discipline Chatfield for this, but they're not. So, yeah, really fun game to watch. But I think the people who love fighting in the sport, most of them, I would say, probably don't like that type of play that Chatfield did, because that could have been a lot worse, man. Like, his head could have cracked open if it hit the ice harder. That was really scary to watch.
Yeah, and that's the thing here. You're never going to entirely convince people there isn't a role for fighting in hockey. Right. And as much as I think it's kind of pointless where we're at in the game now, the thing that has always irked me when we have these conversations, and we are going to throw it to Locked On Capitals for a reaction to the game in a second, but the thing that has always irked me when we have these conversations, and I tie it back to playing sports as a kid. Yeah, you want to win. Yeah, you want to beat who you're playing, but you're supposed to have a baseline level of respect for who you're out there with. They're just trying to play the game. You can fight, you can hit someone, but when you do something like that, that's dangerous. That's showing a fundamental lack of respect for who you're playing and what that says about you. And yeah, you've got, 10, 15 pounds and you're 2 or 3 inches taller than Connor McMichael. Doesn't mean you throw him to the ground, no helmet on. That shows a fundamental lack of respect. And that's not something you want to be in the business of. It is unnecessary and it's just fundamentally dangerous. And yeah, takedowns happen from time to time in fights in hockey. That's part of it, but that's not a takedown. He threw him to the ground with no helmet on. That is an unnecessary
WWE type stuff. And I know there's a lot of WWE fans out there, Nick. I don't want to watch that in hockey. I totally get that a lot of people still like fighting. And I 1,000,000% understand it. Even as someone who I used to like it quite a bit, I don't like it as much as I do anymore, but I understand why a lot of fans like it. I don't like that type of move that Chatfield did. I don't think there's a place for that in today's game.
No, there's not a place for that in any game. That's just unnecessarily dangerous. All right, we're going to throw it to Locked On Caps for a reaction to the loss.
The Capitals fall to the Carolina Hurricanes by a score of 5-1. Hi, this is Dan Homey of Locked On Capitals. Well, this game was all sorts of ugly as the Capitals were down 3-0 within the first 13 minutes of the game. The Hurricanes scored 3 goals on 12 shots. Netminder Logan Thompson left the game in the first period with an upper body injury. Was not his night in general. Charlie Lindgren came into the game. And you take a look at it, a lot of penalties, 6 penalties. The penalty kill struggled. There was sloppy play out there. The bright news, of course, is that Alex Ovechkin scored a goal, so there's always a silver lining, now 3 goals away from breaking that record. A lot of physicality, Tom Wilson, Duhaime, and a dirty play, a fight, if you will, with Connor McMichael, where he was thrown to the ice. I'll have more on this for you later on Locked On Caps.
So as we move along in our conversation here, we only have a minute or 2 left before we have to take our first break. I am really hopeful Ovechkin gets this done before the regular season is over. I think it's a really compelling, engaging story. I think the Capitals at large are one of the best stories in hockey this year. The turnaround they've had year over year. They get the shot in the arm of adding a really highly touted prospect in Riley Leonard right before the start of the playoffs. And Ryan Leonard, excuse me. Riley Leonard's the Notre Dame quarterback. My brain gets a little, the wires get crossed up there from time to time when we're talking about sports. But you drop Ryan Leonard in there. You have Ovechkin chasing down this record, which he would have if he didn't break his leg earlier in the season and missed 6 weeks. But the Capitals are a great story. And I think, and I'll throw it to you on this note, I think it's really funny that none of us believe in this team in terms of the playoffs. I think a lot of us are very skeptical of a team this reliant on their goaltending and frankly on outshooting their metrics, because you ask people, who do you like in the East? Florida, Tampa Bay. That's the end of the conversation. And that's me included. I'm not just speaking generally.
I mean, I have them as a top 3 team in the conference right up there with Florida and Tampa Bay. I just question whether this season-long play can translate to the playoffs, Nick, especially as the refs swallow their whistles. You don't get as many power plays and all that stuff. And does your goaltending stay the same? I did see, Nick, also Logan Thompson is a bit banged up right now. The Capitals have to hope that he is okay going forward because he's been one of the best goaltenders in the entire NHL this season. Even though I know Charlie Lindgren is also playing well, I would still start Logan Thompson game 1 if he is healthy for the Capitals. But that's the big thing. I know some people say that they're PDO merchants and all that stuff. But they will have an opportunity, the Capitals, to debunk that in the playoffs. I will take them to win the first round, whoever they play in wild card 2, whether it's the Rangers, the Canadiens, the Blue Jackets. Some of those teams present bigger challenges than others. I think if the Rangers do get that spot, for example, Nick, you have the factor of Igor Shesterkin. If he gets hot, that's going to be a much tougher series to win. Montreal, they have some really young players. They're going to have that nothing to lose attitude. No one believed in us heading into the season. Now that we're in, let's go out. There's really no expectations now. Let's just go experience some playoff hockey. The Blue Jackets, they are also quite a story. The Islanders are like cockroaches, even though they're struggling a lot right now. I will take the Capitals to win that series. But, in the second round, would they be able to get past a team like Carolina, who also has struggled a lot in the playoffs recently? But for the Caps, my biggest thing is, can you beat a bully of a team like Tampa or like a Florida in the third round if you get that far? Remember, this is a Capitals team that has only gotten to the conference final once in the entire Alex Ovechkin era. It happens to be the one year they won, of course. But still, that's going to be the big test for me. Those deeper teams that can really play you physical, that have really good goaltending, they're really stingy in their own zone. That's going to be the big test for me with Washington. And of course, will this shooting percentage and the goaltending, will all of this carry over in the playoffs? Because Nick, you look up and down this roster, it's good, but I don't think anyone saw them being this good heading into the year.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. They've had one of the higher possible outcomes in when you look at this team in terms of what people expected from them. We are going to take our first break of today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we are going to hit on the Leafs and Panthers in what was a crucial game in the Atlantic Division race to win that division, what it means in terms of the playoffs for both of those teams, and a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On NHL, your team every day. There is nothing like getting to a game, a concert, or a show. The energy of the crowd, the smell of the popcorn, that magical feeling of walking out into the tunnel and seeing the entire view in front of you. And if you want to catch a game, a concert, or a show in person, Game Time has made it easier than ever to get tickets. Game Time's new feature, Game Time Picks, filters out the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time scrolling through thousands of tickets. I'm going to the Yankee game tonight against the Diamondbacks to see my boy Corbin Carroll. Got my tickets for that on Game Time. I may or may not pull the trigger on Mets opening day tickets for tomorrow as well. And Game Time has me covered with the super deal where you can get the best bang for your buck. And the best part of the Game Time experience is the peace of mind. You get a seat view before you buy the tickets. There are no surprise fees, and they have the lowest price guarantee, meaning you can book your tickets with total confidence. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on today's Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. And we said this a few weeks ago when we were talking about the Leafs, and I want to start the conversation here before we throw it to our features from our hosts. But I have been waiting for the Leafs to get into the playoffs to determine what they are, because we've seen them do this before where they've had the good regular season, they've had home ice in the first round, and it hasn't mattered all that much by and large. And I don't think this is the best iteration of the Leafs. I think they've had better versions of themselves. I think their bottom six and the bottom half of their defense are definitely a bit concerning. I think the Scott Laughton edition hasn't really worked out the way they intended it to. And still, they're in first place. They thoroughly beat Florida last night with no Tkachuk, and that does matter having no Matthew Tkachuk out there. But the Leafs feel like they can do this, and whoever ends up with that wild card spot is going to make for a really good series. Like if you get Ottawa, Toronto, or if you get Toronto, Montreal, either of those are really compelling. You throw the Rangers in the mix. Even if you throw Columbus in there, you can revisit that series from the bubble where we had Blue Jackets Leafs in the qualifying round, and the Jackets eliminated the Leafs in that qualifying round. So the narratives are here. I hate to say it, but yes, everything does impact the Leafs, Hunter. Every story in hockey is about the Leafs.
At least right now, it really is funny. Like you have the meme, how does this impact the Leafs? Well, a lot does, as you just said. And I also think one thing you did miss, but not intentionally, of course, Nick, they are now in first place in their division. That is so huge because if they are able to get first place, they avoid playing one of Tampa Bay or Toronto in the first round. Because if they were to fall into that 2-3 matchup, I would take one of the Florida teams over them just because of the way they have played this season and how I trust more of their big game players in the playoffs over the Leafs right now. And for obvious reasons, man. I mean, I like the Leafs core four, but they still need to prove it to me in the playoffs. However, if they do get Ottawa, which that series would feed families, by the way, that would be so fun just for the rivalry. Ottawa gets back in the playoffs for the first time in quite a while. Their young core gets to go up against a Leafs core that is also facing quite a bit of pressure because this could be the last year of the core four of Marner, Nylander, Tavares, and Matthews in Toronto, just because, of contract situations and all that, especially with Tavares, Nick, and Marner being free agents at the end of this season. I would still rather win the division than play one of the two Florida teams in the first round, but they are going to be in for quite a fight if they do get Ottawa, because I really like the way the Senators are playing right now. Linus Ullmark has been really good. Ever since he had a little bit of a slow start, he's been really good. But I will say this, if Joseph Woll can stay healthy for the Leafs in the playoffs and play up to the level that we've seen him play at before, I hate saying it, I think they will be a tough out. We'll have to see. They've had some really good regular season teams. They're going to need to prove it here in a few weeks. But that was a really dominant win by the Leafs last night. I thought all four lines were cooking. I thought they were playing really well defensively. I still want to see what the Panthers look like with Tkachuk once they get him back, hopefully for the playoffs. But as of right now, man, we might get the Battle of Florida in the first round, which it would be a lot of fun. But, man, it would sting for the sport because, that should be at least a second round series. It goes to show how awful this playoff format is, my friend.
You're very right. We're going to throw it to Mike first of Locked On Leafs.
The Toronto Maple Leafs have booked their playoff ticket for the 9th straight season. Hi, I'm Mike DiStefano from the Locked On Leafs podcast. The Toronto Maple Leafs with a 3-2 win over the Florida Panthers ensures a 9th consecutive trip to the postseason for the Buds. They win at 3-2. They trailed 1-0 early in the second period. Then John Tavares keeps the hot streak going. He gets a goal to tie things up at 1. They'd score 2 quick ones in the third period, one from Marner, another from Matthew Knies. The Knies goal would stand as the winner as the Panthers did cut the lead to 3-2, but then Anthony Stolar stood on his head and shut the door in the final couple of minutes. He ended the night with 28 saves, a big performance from the former Panther, but it was a big 2 points for Toronto. We'll talk just about how massive of a 2 points that was in a win over the Panthers on today's Locked On Leafs podcast.
And it's a really interesting way the Leafs have gone about putting this roster together in some of the guys they've prioritized, the goaltending tandem they've put together of Stolars and Wall, which is very reminiscent of what the Leafs have done in the past, where they throw 2 tandem goalies into a tandem, play reasonably well in front of them, and they have good regular season results. And this is what you have to do if you don't have one of those bell cow 55, 60 start goalies.
No, 100%. And if you can, I've said this a lot when it comes to, the Penguins in recent years and such, but if a team like this can just get average goaltending in the playoffs, they should be fine. You look at the talent they have, especially up front. Your big guns should be able to show up. Their back end, especially under Craig Berube, you know what you're going to get from a Craig Berube team in the playoffs. His teams usually play really stingy. So you combine that with the offensive talent you have up front, and if you can just get average goaltending, someone that at times can bail you out if you really need a save, while other times just, making the regular normal saves that you need your goalie to make, they should be fine. It's just that they haven't had all 3 of those things combined yet in the playoffs, Nick. Like some years, Nick, it's been some of their star players haven't showed up. Some years it's been the goaltending has kind of been missed. Sometimes it's been they haven't played well defensively. If Berube can get all 3 of these to combine into one, this could be the year they go on a deep playoff run. But again, man, I got to see it to believe it.
Yeah, and we're going to throw it to Armando of Locked On Panthers.
The shorthanded Panthers fall apart in the third period, and their division's hopes have slipped away. What is up, guys? Armando Velez here from the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, here to quickly break down the Panthers' 3-2 loss against the Toronto Maple Leafs, where Alexander Barkov nor Nico Sturm participated in this game due to injuries the night before. They had to shift a few things with Etu Lucerin and Anton Lundell going to the top line, Evan Rodriguez going from the wing to center, and then even calling up Jacob Megna to play on the third pair. But for the most part, the Panthers did not get into a track meet with the Toronto Maple Leafs, limited the stars of the Leafs until the third period. And the frustrating part is the fact that they got 80 shots on net, got pucks in deep, won a good amount of battles, and even got players in front of the net. 80 shot attempts for them, but they were unable to finish and only got 2 goals on the night. And that's the frustrating part about this. We're going to break all this down on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
And real quick for Florida's at the point now where as long as they get in, I'm not really worried, because this is a team that's shown the ability to underdog their way to a Stanley Cup final and beat the brakes off of everybody on their way to a Stanley Cup.
They got to get some guys back though, Nick. Like they need to get healthy. It's very obviously speaking here. They don't get their big dogs back, like they don't stand a chance, especially if we do get them against Tampa Bay. I like that Marchand's back. That's huge. I like that Bobrovsky is healthy and he's been really good these last couple of playoff runs, but got to get Barkov back. You got to get Tkachuk back. Like right now, they're kind of just humming along a little bit. Like we know they're going to get in. But if they can get their big dogs back with the way they play under Maurice in the playoffs, I'm not really going to be too concerned.
Yeah, no, my friend Brian had jokingly said, have we ever seen a team from the state of Florida win the Stanley Cup and then the year after get a winger back who makes $9.5 million per year and come back into the lineup the first game of the playoffs? What happened to that team? Have we ever seen that happen before? Just some food for thought here on Locked On NHL. We are going to take our second and final break of today's show, and when we come back, we're going to visit Connor Bedard and the poor Chicago Blackhawks. It is Final Four weekend, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to big scoring games and who's going to cut down the nets. Now, you guys know, Final Four weekend, first time in a few years now, we have 4 number 1 seeds in the Final Four. Florida, Auburn. I'm looking at my bracket because I actually have it written out, and Hunter's been making fun of me for a few weeks for having it. And then Duke and Houston are the 4 number 1 seeds. So if you want to make the most of your Final Four weekend, get in on the action now. There's just 3 games left in the tournament. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when you win, you get paid out instantly. No waiting around. Visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action before it's too late. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL with Hunter and I. And we're not quite at the Kyle Davidson, Bill Simmons voice, are we sure he's good point yet, but that's going to be the conversation this summer around the Blackhawks, because as good as Bedard was last year as a rookie, he's one guy. No matter how good your one guy is, if you put him on a team this bad, there's only so much they can do. I know you and I were pretty adamant in our defenses of Bedard a few weeks ago, and a couple of the national media people were railing on him for not back-checking that aggressively and not making a good defensive play, as if it's his fault the Blackhawks are the second worst team in the entire league. He's one of like 4 guys on that entire roster who has a pulse and is an above-average NHL player. And your goal now, if you're Chicago, you can't become Buffalo. You got the guy. You know, the Sabres had Jack Eichel, who's a consensus top 15 player in the entire league now, and they weren't able to do anything with it. And you could make an argument they have Dahlin and Power right now, and Dahlin, you could argue, is a top 20, top 25 player in the entire sport, and it doesn't matter a whole lot either. You need a whole lot more than just a handful of talented guys, and that Blackhawks team is just so starved for anything resembling quality hockey that it's hard for me at least to put a lot of the blame on Bedard. It's the same thing you're watching with people talking about the Rangers and Panarin going from 120 points last year to 90 this year. McDavid going from 120 points last year to 90-something points this year. They're still really good. It's just the team they're on isn't as good, and I think people lose sight of that.
Nick, they have Ryan Donato and Ilya Mikheyev on that top line with Connor Bedard. And I'm not trying to disrespect Ryan Donato. He is having a career year. 29 goals, 59 points in 73 games. But Nick, he's also shooting 17%. That is going to regress next season. Very happy again that he is having this good of a season, but no one expected him to be that good this year. And Ilya Mikheyev, all due respect to him, I think he is a fine middle six forward. Apologies for my text chain going off on my Mac as we finish this episode here, but he's a fine middle six guy. He's not a top line forward. He's not. So they need help. I mean, I should say actually, Bedard needs a lot of help. This is the offseason where I think Chicago really needs to start mobilizing and getting in some more talent to this lineup, whether it's free agency, whether it's trades, offer sheets, you name it. They need to get this kid some help because, like, Nick, we're basically 2 full years into Connor Bedard being a Chicago Blackhawk. They are not even close to contending for a Stanley Cup, let alone contending to make the playoffs. This has to be the offseason where they start mobilizing.
And they got the goalie. I'll give them that. That was one of my big concerns, was getting a goalie in there that they could have long-term, and getting out of the Seth Jones contract is objectively good management because that was an overpay at the time and it's been expensive, even as contracts age a little more favorably now that we're going to operate in a more favorable cap environment. But let's start to Locked On Blackhawks for more.
Super frustrating 3-2 shootout loss for the Chicago Blackhawks as they blow a 2-0 lead in the third period, giving up the game-tying goal, which is 10 seconds left to play, and then wind up falling to the Avalanche in the shootout. And for this game to start at 8:52 p.m. Central Time, that was egregious in and alone of itself. But for this game to go the way that it did, that was just extra salt in the wound. The Hawks had a chance to put it away, too. They blew a couple of power play opportunities in the final 10 minutes of regulation. Spencer Knight was outstanding all night long in a bounce-back game, but Scott Wedgwood just would not let the Hawks put away the game winner. The Hawks have now dropped 11 of their last 12 games and fall to 21-44-10 on the season. For more thoughts on this loss, check out tomorrow's episode of Locked On Blackhawks.
And look, this is a massive undertaking. We are talking about a 3 or 4 year prolonged extended rebuild. They ripped that team as down to the studs as feasibly possible. And they have had a ton of draft picks over the last few years. They need to start transitioning those guys to the NHL roster. And I get it that they wanted to have a baseline level of competency in bringing in guys like Alec Martinez and Nick Foligno, so it wasn't just kids there. But ultimately, how your rebuild goes, how your rebuild is going to be judged is on how those guys fill out your lineup. And if you can't do anything with Frank Nazar, and I do like Alex Vlasic, I'll give them that. I do think Alex Vlasic's a pretty good hockey player for what he is right now, but you need more. You need to start translating these draft picks into bodies at the NHL level, and you need to evaluate them on, is this guy going to stay? Is this guy a building block, or is this a chip to turn into something else? Because right now, it still feels like the Blackhawks are at the first part of this rebuild, and they're 3 years into it at this point.
No, 100%. And it looks like right now they are going to get one of the top 4 players in this draft, whether it's Misa, Schaefer, Martone, or Higgins. In my opinion, I think all 4 could be ready for the NHL by next season, especially Misa and Schaefer. Nick, if they can get one of those 2, I think that will really potentially speed this up a little bit, because I think those 2, especially Misa and Schaefer, they're the 2 best prospects in this draft, but Martone and Higgins are also really good as well. I think the Blackhawks are going to get one of those 4, probably going to be one of Misa or Schaefer, but I could also see them being aggressive in the RFA market this offseason. They have a lot of cap space. So why not? Especially with the cap continuing to go up, I think you're going to see more and more teams start offer sheeting players. You saw how successful the Blues were this past offseason. Doug Armstrong said to media, if my mom was an opposing GM, I still would have done it. I want those type of offer sheets to come back. And I do think the Blackhawks will look to do it, especially with how much talent they still need at the NHL level. Real quickly here before we end the show on the Avalanche, this team, man, they're playing really well right now, and we've been fooled by this before, my friend, but it looks like Gabe Landeskog is maybe going to give this a go in the playoffs. He's been really ramping this thing up in practice, apparently, been knifing through some guys. I've been looking at some Colorado Avalanche beat reporters' tweets saying that he looks really good in practice. Again, man, I know we've been fooled before, but it looks like he might be trying to give this a go in the playoffs, and I really hope he can, because that would be such a big boost to their lineup if he can come back and play really well. We have to see, though, because it's still going to be a really tough series against Dallas, and I think we're going to get that series in the first round.
It's again, and we can end the show on this note. You're going to get Colorado, Dallas, and Florida, Tampa Bay more likely not in your first round, and that is not a good reflection on your playoff format. You want to have your best teams go as far as they can. And yes, does this breed resentment and rivalries? Sure, but that's not why I'm watching. I'm watching because I want to see the best teams play. And yes, getting good teams playing each other is better than the alternative of not getting it at all. But at the same time, Dallas, Colorado is absolutely good enough where that could be a conference final quality matchup as opposed to a first rounder. But that will do it for today's edition of Locked On NHL. Please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. If you happen to be listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. Hunter and I will see you guys next Thursday. Maybe by then, Ovi will have the goal record. Maybe by then, we'll be talking about 2 completely different teams in wildcard spots. We'll see you guys then.